I was wearing the green silk dress I bought just to make Blake notice me again. The rooftop party glittered with champagne and laughter, his colleagues and their perfect wives dancing under string lights. I felt brave maybe from the wine and approached my husband on the makeshift dance floor. I leaned in for a kiss. He recoiled like I carried disease. "I'd rather kiss my dog than kiss you," he said loud enough for everyone to hear. They laughed nervously. Then he smiled coldly. "You don't even meet my standards. Stay away from me." The laughter grew confident, cruel. I stood frozen, burning with humiliation, forcing a smile. Then I took one breath and said clearly, "That's funny, Blake. Because your dog has better taste than you do. At least he knows who actually feeds him." The entire room went silent. I walked away with my head high, grabbed my coat from the penthouse entrance, and left without looking back. Blake didn't follow. I took an Uber home to our 5-bedroom house in Bellevue, watching the Seattle skyline blur past the window. During the 20-minute ride, I shook uncontrollably, replaying that moment over and over. How had our 12-year marriage come to this? When did I become someone my own husband could humiliate in front of dozens of people? We got married when I was 22, and he was 25. Back then, Blake was charming, ambitious, working his way up in commercial real estate. I had just finished my marketing degree. We were happy once. Or maybe I just convinced myself we were. I arrived home around 11:30. Ranger Blake's golden retriever greeted me at the door with his usual enthusiasm. The irony wasn't lost on me. The dog Blake claimed he'd rather kiss than me was wagging his tail, happy to see me like he always was. I fed Ranger, gave him fresh water, and poured myself a glass of wine. My hands were still shaking. Sleep felt impossible. My mind raced with anger, hurt, and something else. A growing awareness that tonight wasn't an isolated incident. Blake had been cold for months, distant, coming home late, sleeping in the guest bedroom for the past 3 weeks, claiming my snoring kept him awake. I made excuses. He was stressed about work. The new development project was demanding. He needed space. But tonight shattered every excuse I'd made for him. I ended up in our home office around midnight, still wearing that green dress. Blake's laptop sat open on the desk. He must have forgotten it in his rush to get to the party. I knew his password. It had always been the same since we got married. Our wedding date 08/12/2013. At first, I just wanted to check his calendar. Maybe seeing how overworked he was would help me understand his cruelty. Maybe I could rationalize it somehow, make sense of the man who used to bring me coffee in bed and now couldn't stand to be kissed by me. I opened his email instead. The inbox loaded, and I saw them immediately. Messages from someone named A.M., with subject lines that made my stomach drop. "Last night was amazing. Can't wait to see you Thursday. Missing you already." My hand hovered over the mouse. Part of me wanted to close the laptop, go to bed, pretend I hadn't seen anything, but I clicked. The messages were explicit. Photos of a woman I didn't recognize, young and beautiful, maybe 26 or 27. Her name was Ashley Montgomery. The emails went back 7 months. 7 months of "I love you" messages, hotel receipts, promises. Blake had been buying her jewelry, taking her to expensive restaurants, planning a future with her. One email from 3 weeks ago made me physically ill. "Once I finalize the divorce, we can be together openly. Just a little longer, baby. Colette has no idea. She's too busy playing housewife to notice anything." I sat there staring at the screen, feeling like my entire reality was crumbling. 12 years. 12 years of marriage. Of believing in us. Of putting my career on hold because Blake said we didn't need my income. I quit my marketing job 8 years ago when his business took off. He convinced me we'd start a family soon, that I should focus on making our home perfect, on supporting his career. We never had children. Blake kept saying the timing wasn't right. Now I understood why. I started taking screenshots with my phone, my hands steadier now. Anger was replacing hurt. I forwarded several emails to my personal account. I needed evidence. I needed proof of what he'd done. Then I noticed another folder in his email. It was labeled Montgomery Project. I clicked thinking it might be about Ashley. Her last name was Montgomery. Instead, I found financial documents, detailed spreadsheets, investor agreements, profit projections for a massive commercial development deal. Blake was closing a $75 million luxury condo project in downtown Seattle, 15 units at $5 million each. But something was wrong with the numbers. I spent 4 years working in marketing before I quit, but I understood enough about business to recognize discrepancies. There were 2 sets of books. One showed realistic profit projections based on actual construction costs and market analysis. The other showed inflated projections promising investors returns that the actual numbers couldn't possibly support. Blake was committing fraud. My stomach twisted as I scrolled through investor names. These weren't strangers. I recognized them. Harold Blake's 68-year-old uncle who'd invested his retirement savings. 3 couples from our church who'd trusted Blake with their money. The Hendersons next door who'd refinanced their home to invest. Family friends who believed in him. Blake wasn't just cheating on me. He was destroying people's lives. I grabbed a USB drive from the desk drawer and started downloading files. My mind raced. What was I supposed to do with this information? Go to the police, contact a lawyer, confront Blake. I heard his car pull into the driveway around 2 in the morning. I quickly closed all the windows, cleared the browsing history, and hid the USB drive in my jewelry box upstairs. By the time Blake came through the door, I was sitting in the living room, appearing calm. He looked terrible. Drunk, disheveled, smelling like perfume that wasn't mine. "Still awake," he said, not even trying to hide his disdain. "That's pathetic. Were you waiting up for me like some needy housewife?" I bit my tongue. Every instinct screamed at me to throw everything I'd discovered in his face. But something held me back. Some survival instinct that told me confronting him now when he was drunk and I was unprepared would be a mistake. "Just couldn't sleep," I said quietly. He laughed a harsh sound. "Right. Well, I'm going to bed. The guest room, obviously. Your snoring is unbearable." I'd never snored in my life. It was just another lie, another excuse to avoid me. Blake stumbled upstairs and I heard the guest room door close. I sat in the dark living room holding that USB drive, feeling the weight of everything I'd discovered. Part of me wanted to pack a bag and leave tonight. But where would I go? My sister Madison lived in Portland, but showing up at her door at 2 in the morning with wild accusations against Blake seemed unwise. I needed a plan. I needed to be smart about this. As the sun started rising around 6, I was still awake, still sitting there. Ranger had fallen asleep at my feet, loyal as always. I reached down and petted him, thinking about Blake's words at the party. "I'd rather kiss my dog than kiss you." I looked at Ranger, sleeping peacefully. "At least you actually love me," I whispered. I decided I would gather more evidence. I would document everything. Then I would leave file for divorce and report the investment fraud to the proper authorities. It seemed like a solid plan. Logical, safe. I had no idea that my discovery and every attempt I made to expose Blake would trigger an avalanche of consequences far worse than anything I could imagine. Saturday morning came too quickly. I hadn't slept at all. Blake appeared downstairs around 8, looking refreshed and acting like nothing had happened. He made coffee, humming to himself, completely at ease. I couldn't hold it in. "We need to talk about last night," I said. He glanced at me over his coffee cup. "What about it?" "What you said to me at the party. In front of everyone." Blake shrugged. "I was drinking. You were being clingy. It was embarrassing." Embarrassing. My voice cracked. You humiliated me. Maybe you should have taken the hint instead of throwing yourself at me on the dance floor. He said it so casually, like discussing the weather. We haven't been intimate in months, Colette. Did you really think that was the appropriate time and place? I felt my face flush. He was turning this around on me, making me feel guilty for wanting affection from my own husband. I know about Ashley, I said. The temperature in the room dropped. Blake set down his coffee cup slowly. Excuse me. I pulled out my phone, showed him one of the printed emails I'd prepared. My hands were shaking, but my voice was steady. Ashley Montgomery. 7 months. Hotels, gifts, promises. I found all of it. I expected anger, defensiveness. Instead, Blake's expression turned cold and calculating. You went through my private emails. His voice was quiet, dangerous. That's a violation, Colette. An invasion of my privacy. I stared at him, stunned. You're having an affair, and you're making me the bad guy for finding out. The relationship with Ashley is just physical. It means nothing. He said it dismissively, like it was obvious. You stopped taking care of yourself years ago. Look at yourself honestly. When's the last time you went to the gym? When did you stop trying to be attractive? His words hit like physical blows. I looked down at myself. I'd gained maybe 15 pounds over 12 years. I was 34 years old, not a supermodel, but I wasn't unattractive. Was I? Blake, you're having an affair, I said, trying to stay focused. And you're snooping through my private correspondence, he countered. You violated my trust, Colette. That's the real issue here. I felt myself spiraling. How was he making this my fault? I also saw the Montgomery Project files, I said. The 2 sets of books, the inflated projections. Blake's entire demeanor changed. His face went completely blank. You don't understand business, Colette. Those are standard development projections. Different scenarios for different outcomes. But I saw it, just for a second. Fear flickered in his eyes. He knew I'd found something real. Harold invested his entire retirement, I pressed. The Hendersons refinanced their house. You're lying to them about the returns. You have no idea what you're talking about. Blake's voice was sharp now. Those are complex financial instruments that someone with your limited understanding couldn't possibly comprehend. This is exactly why you shouldn't be going through my business files. He made me feel stupid, incompetent, like a child who'd stumbled into adult affairs she couldn't understand. Blake, I worked in marketing for 4 years. I understand projections and profit margins. Those numbers don't add up. 4 years in entry-level marketing hardly makes you a financial expert. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. You're stressed, Colette. Your mother's death last year affected you more than you want to admit. You're seeing conspiracies where there aren't any. My mother. He was bringing up my mother. She died by suicide 14 months ago after battling depression for years. It had devastated me. Blake knew that wound was still raw. Don't bring my mother into this, I said quietly. I'm just concerned about you. His tone shifted to something approximating sympathy. You've been different since she died. Drinking more, becoming paranoid. Maybe you should talk to someone. I'm not paranoid. I found evidence of your affair and your fraud. You found emails about a meaningless fling and business documents you misunderstood because you're not equipped to understand them. He stepped closer. I think the stress of your mother's suicide has affected your judgment more than you realize. Maybe you inherited some of her mental health issues. I felt like I'd been slapped. My mother's depression, her suicide. He was weaponizing my grief, suggesting I was mentally unstable like she had been. I know what I saw, I insisted, but my voice sounded weak even to my own ears. Do you, Blake? Tilted his head. Or are you so desperate to find reasons for our marital problems that you're creating them? It's easier to blame me than to look at your own contributions to the failure of this marriage. I left the kitchen, went upstairs, locked myself in the bathroom. My hands were shaking. I looked at myself in the mirror. Was I crazy? Had I misunderstood? No. No. I knew what I'd seen. The emails were real. The financial discrepancies were real. But Blake had planted doubt. That was the terrifying part. He was so convincing, so calm, that part of me started questioning my own perception. By Sunday afternoon, things got worse. Blake had been making phone calls all day. To friends, to business associates, to people from our church. I didn't think much of it until our friend Jennifer called me. "Colette, honey, I wanted to check on you," Jennifer said, her voice dripping with concern. "Blake mentioned you've been struggling lately." My stomach dropped. What did he say? "Just that you've been having a hard time since your mom passed. That you've been drinking more, becoming a bit paranoid." She paused. "He said you accused him of some pretty wild things yesterday. He's really worried about you." "Jennifer, that's not what happened. Blake is having an affair. I found proof." "Oh, sweetie." Jennifer's tone was patronizing, pitying. "Sometimes grief makes us see things that aren't there. Blake loves you. He's been calling everyone asking for advice on how to help you. He's being really supportive." "He's lying to you," I said desperately. "Maybe you should talk to someone professional," Jennifer suggested gently. "There's no shame in getting help. With your family history of mental illness." I hung up. She thought I was crazy. Blake had already poisoned her against me. Sunday morning at church was worse. We attended a large congregation where Blake served on the board. He'd gotten there early before me. During coffee hour after service, people were different, distant, looking at me with pity and concern. Patricia, a woman I'd known for 5 years, pulled me aside. "Colette, if you ever need to talk, I'm here," she said, squeezing my hand. "Blake told us about what you're going through. It must be so difficult." "What exactly did Blake tell you?" "That you've been struggling with your mental health since your mother's passing, that you've been making accusations, becoming paranoid." Patricia's eyes were kind, but her words were devastating. "He's being so patient with you. You're lucky to have such a supportive husband." I looked across the fellowship hall. Blake was talking to the pastor, looking concerned and noble. He caught my eye and gave me a sad, sympathetic smile. To everyone watching, he looked like a devoted husband worried about his troubled wife. I left church early, drove home, and spent the rest of Sunday in a fog. Blake had systematically turned our entire social circle against me. Everyone believed I was having a mental breakdown. His narrative was working. Monday morning, I tried to fight back. I called Jennifer again, asked to meet for coffee. I brought printed copies of Blake's emails with Ashley, of the financial documents showing the fraud. Jennifer met me at a coffee shop in Kirkland. She looked uncomfortable from the start. I spread the papers on the table between us. "Look, this is proof. Blake is having an affair with Ashley Montgomery. And look at these financial documents. He's defrauding investors." Jennifer glanced at the papers, barely reading them. "Colette, you printed out your husband's private emails. That's not healthy. That's obsessive behavior. Jennifer, please just read them." "I don't feel comfortable looking at Blake's private correspondence." She pushed the papers back toward me. "And these financial things, I don't understand any of that. Neither do you, probably. Blake is a successful businessman. I'm sure there are explanations. You're not even going to consider that I might be telling the truth." Jennifer sighed. "You need to hear this as a friend. You're obsessing over Blake's work, violating his privacy, making wild accusations. That's not normal, Colette. Blake suggested marriage counseling might help. I think that's a good idea." I gathered up my papers, feeling defeated. "You don't believe me." "I believe you're hurting," Jennifer said kindly. "But I also believe you're not seeing things clearly right now. Please get some help. For your own sake." I left the coffee shop and sat in my car crying. Blake had won. He'd isolated me completely. No one believed me. Everyone thought I was mentally unstable. That evening, Blake came home acting sympathetic. "I heard you met with Jennifer today," he said. "She's worried about you. So am I." "I'm not crazy, Blake." "I never said you were crazy." He sat down across from me, looking genuinely concerned. "It was a good performance. But I think you're struggling more than you want to admit. Your mother's suicide, it affected you deeply. Maybe you inherited some of her depressive tendencies. There's no shame in that." "Stop talking about my mother." "I want to help you, Colette. I've made an appointment with a therapist I know, Dr. Raymond Harrison. He specializes in grief counseling and family trauma. Will you go? For me?" It was a trap. I knew it was a trap. But what choice did I have? If I refused, it would only confirm Blake's narrative that I was in denial about my mental health. "Fine," I said. "Good." Blake smiled. "We'll get through this together. I still love you despite everything." Despite everything. Like I was the problem. Like I was the one who'd destroyed our marriage. By Tuesday morning, I realized I couldn't stay. I couldn't fight Blake from inside this house, surrounded by his manipulation. I needed to leave, take my evidence to authorities, file for divorce. I'd go to my sister's place in Portland, regroup, and come back with lawyers and law enforcement. I packed a bag while Blake was at work. I had the USB drive, printed emails, everything I needed. I'd drive to Portland, stay with Madison and her husband Trevor, and figure out my next steps from there. This was the solution. Leave, get help, come back stronger. I had no idea that Blake had anticipated this exact move and had already set traps I wouldn't see until it was too late. Tuesday afternoon, around 2, I drove to our bank to withdraw cash for the trip to Portland. I figured I'd need about $800 or $1,000 to get started. Blake and I had a joint checking account with about $42,000 and a savings account with another $75,000, more than enough for me to get on my feet. I inserted my debit card into the ATM at the bank branch in Bellevue, requested $500. The machine made its usual processing sounds, then displayed a message, "Transaction denied. Insufficient funds." I tried again. Same message. Confused and increasingly anxious, I went inside the bank. The lobby was busy with the usual afternoon crowd. I waited in line, my heart pounding harder with each passing minute. Something was wrong. When I finally reached a teller, a woman named Carol, who I'd seen dozens of times over the years, she seemed nervous the moment she looked up my account. "Mrs. Patterson, let me get the branch manager for you," Carol said quietly. "I just need to withdraw some cash," I said. "Why was my card declined?" "Please, just one moment." The branch manager, a man in his 50s named Gerald, appeared and ushered me into a private office. That's when I knew something was seriously wrong. "Mrs. Patterson, I'm afraid your checking account has been frozen," Gerald said. "Frozen by who?" "By your husband. He came in yesterday afternoon with documentation showing he needed to restrict access to the joint accounts for business purposes. It's legal when there are concerns about unauthorized transactions." My hands started shaking. "What about our savings?" Gerald looked uncomfortable. "Mr. Patterson transferred those funds to accounts in his name only. He has the legal right to do that in Washington state, especially when the assets are primarily from his income." I felt the room tilt. "How much is left in the checking account?" $87.32. $87 out of $42,000. Blake had taken everything and left me with almost nothing. "When did he do this?" "Yesterday afternoon, shortly after lunch. Right after I'd confronted him about Ashley and the Montgomery project, he'd immediately gone to the bank and cut off my access to all our money." "This can't be legal," I said. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Patterson. In Washington, assets earned during marriage are community property, but either spouse can take protective measures if they believe the funds are at risk." Your husband cited concerns about impulsive spending and financial instability. Financial instability. Another lie Blake had planted. I left the bank in a daze, sat in my car and tried my credit cards. Every single one was declined. Blake had canceled them all. I had $123 in cash in my wallet. That was it. Everything else was in Blake's name or under his control. My phone buzzed. A text from Blake. We need to talk about your spending. Come home. He'd been waiting for me to discover what he'd done. He'd set this trap yesterday and now he was watching it snap shut. I thought about driving to Portland anyway, but with barely over $100, how would I even buy gas? Where would I stay if Madison's husband didn't want me there? I realized something else. The car I was sitting in, it was registered in Blake's name. He'd insisted on that when we bought it 3 years ago, said it was better for insurance purposes. Our house was in his name too for tax reasons, he'd explained. I'd trusted him completely, never questioning any of it. Now I understood. Blake had been setting this up for years, making sure I had no assets in my own name, no financial independence. He'd systematically stripped me of any power. I called my sister Madison in Portland. Maddie, I need your help, I said when she answered. Colette. What's wrong? You sound upset. I explained everything. The affair, the fraud, Blake cutting off my access to money. I begged to come stay with her and Trevor while I figured things out. Madison was quiet for a long moment. Colette, Blake called me yesterday. My stomach dropped. What did he say? He said you've been having an episode, that you've been making wild accusations against him, that you're not thinking clearly. He said you might call me with crazy stories. Madison's voice was gentle but firm. He sounded really worried about you. Maddie, I'm not crazy. Blake is lying. He's having an affair and committing fraud, and he's trying to make everyone think I'm mentally unstable so no one will believe me. Trevor and I talked about it, Madison continued. We want to help you, but Trevor works in commercial real estate. He can't afford to get involved in whatever is happening between you and Blake. Blake has a lot of connections in the industry. So you won't let me stay with you. I can wire you some money if you need it. But Trevor doesn't want you coming here right now. Not until you get some professional help and we understand what's really happening. Even my own sister didn't believe me. I drove back to the house in Bellevue. I had no choice. No money, no car that was actually mine, nowhere to go. Blake had trapped me completely. He was waiting when I walked in, sitting in the living room with a glass of scotch, completely calm. Did you have a productive afternoon? He asked. You took all our money. I protected our assets, he corrected. You went through my confidential business files, Colette. That's corporate espionage. I had to take precautions. Corporate espionage, I'm your wife. You're someone who violated my privacy, stole proprietary information, and has been making dangerous accusations. He took a sip of his drink. I spoke with my attorney, Samuel Whitman. He advised me to restrict your access to funds until we can sort this out. Samuel Whitman, one of Seattle's most expensive and powerful attorneys. Of course, Blake had the money for the best legal representation. I'm filing for divorce, I said. Blake laughed. With what money? You haven't worked in 8 years. You have a huge employment gap, no income, no assets in your name. And now you have a reputation for instability and paranoid accusations. I have evidence of your affair. You have stolen emails that prove I had a brief extramarital relationship. In Washington, that doesn't matter much for divorce settlements. It's a no-fault state. He leaned forward. But you know what does matter? Documented mental instability, which I've been carefully establishing for the past few days. The blood drained from my face. He'd been planning this, calling our friends, talking to people at church, contacting my sister, building a case that I was unstable. And if you try to expose the Montgomery Project, Blake continued, I'll claim you stole confidential trade secrets. You accessed my private business files without authorization. That's a crime, Colette. Corporate espionage carries serious penalties. Those investors deserve to know you're defrauding them. Who do you think people will believe? A successful businessman with impeccable credentials, or his unemployed, mentally unstable wife who admits to stealing his confidential documents? Blake smiled. I have better lawyers than you could ever afford. I have more money. I have credibility. You have nothing. I felt tears burning my eyes, but refused to let them fall. Here's what's going to happen, Blake said. You're going to stay quiet, play the role of the recovering wife, and we'll work through this. I'll allow you limited access to one credit card for necessities. You'll attend therapy with Dr. Harrison. You'll stop making wild accusations. And maybe, if you cooperate, I'll be generous when we eventually divorce. And if I don't cooperate, then I'll destroy you. His voice was cold. I'll have you declared mentally incompetent. You'll end up with nothing, not a penny, not a shred of credibility. You'll be the crazy woman who ruined her own life with paranoid delusions. He stood up, straightened his tie. Think about it tonight. Let me know your decision in the morning. Oh, and Colette, I'd advise against trying to leave again. I've been tracking your phone. I know everywhere you go. He walked upstairs, leaving me sitting there in the dark living room, completely trapped. Wednesday morning I woke up with a desperate plan. Blake had taken the USB drive I'd hidden, but maybe I could get more evidence directly from his office. He kept files there, computer backups, documents that would prove the fraud. If I could access his office after hours, I could photograph everything and have new evidence to take to authorities. It was risky, probably illegal, but I was out of options. I spent Wednesday planning. Blake had a spare key to his office that he kept in his desk at home. I found it that afternoon while he was in a meeting. I also found his office building access card. Thursday night, I would go to his office in downtown Seattle. The building had minimal security after hours. I'd get in, get the evidence, and then figure out my next move. It seemed like the solution. One final gamble. I didn't realize that Blake had been watching everything, that he was 3 steps ahead of me, that my desperate attempt to get evidence would result in my arrest and complete ruin. Thursday night felt like the longest night of my life. I waited until 10 before calling an Uber, used the last of my cash, $28, to get to Blake's office building in downtown Seattle. The driver dropped me off at the corner, and I walked the rest of the way, trying to look casual. The building was a gleaming glass tower, mostly dark at this hour. A security guard sat at the front desk, barely looking up from his phone as I walked past, and flashed the access card I'd taken from Blake's desk. The elevator ride to the 14th floor felt endless. Blake's office was at the end of a long hallway. The key worked perfectly. I slipped inside, closed the door quietly behind me, and let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. His office was exactly as I remembered from the few times I'd visited. Expensive furniture floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city framed photos of completed development projects. A photo of us from our wedding sat on the credenza. I wondered when he'd stop pretending we were a happy couple. I turned on a small desk lamp, just enough light to see. Blake's computer sat on his desk, password protected. I tried our wedding date. It didn't work. He'd changed it, of course. I tried several variations. His birthday, Ranger's name. Nothing worked. Frustrated, I started searching his desk drawers instead. Found files, so many files, investor agreements, construction contracts, financial projections. I pulled out my phone and started photographing everything. Page after page of documents showing the Montgomery project fraud. I found a leather notebook with handwritten notes about offshore accounts. Blake had been moving money, hiding assets. This was even bigger than I'd thought. I'd been there about 40 minutes when the lights suddenly blazed on. I spun around, heart hammering. Building security stood in the doorway, along with 2 Seattle police officers, and Blake. He was wearing a suit, looking devastated, playing his role perfectly. There she is, Blake said, his voice heavy with concern. My wife. Thank God you found her. I was so worried. Sir, you're Blake Patterson, one of the officers asked. Yes, this is my office. When building security called about someone breaking in, I recognized my wife from the security cameras. I came as fast as I could. I stood there, frozen phone still in my hand, surrounded by Blake's files spread across his desk. Ma'am, I need you to put the phone down, the officer said. This isn't what it looks like, I said, but my voice shook. He's committing fraud. I was trying to get evidence. Sir, do you want to press charges? The officer asked Blake. Blake looked at me with perfect sadness. She's my wife. She's been going through something. Making accusations, becoming obsessed with my business. I thought we were working through it, but now she's broken into my office, stealing proprietary company documents. I'm not stealing, I protested. He's defrauding investors. Look at these files. These are confidential business documents that she has no right to access, Blake said. I think she's trying to sell information to my competitors. Or maybe she's just lost touch with reality. I don't know anymore. The officers looked at me with a mixture of pity and suspicion. I could see it in their faces. They saw a desperate woman caught breaking into her husband's office making wild accusations. Ma'am, you're on private property without authorization, one officer said. And you've been photographing confidential documents. We need you to come with us. They arrested me. Actually arrested me. Put handcuffs on my wrists, read me my rights, walked me through the building lobby, while the security guards stared. I'd never been arrested in my life. Never even had a speeding ticket. At the police station they processed me, took my fingerprints, photographed me, put me in a holding cell around 1 a.m. The cell was cold and smelled like disinfectant and despair. I sat on the metal bench, still wearing the jeans and sweater I'd thought were appropriate for breaking and entering, and tried not to cry. Around 2:30, a detective came to talk to me. Detective Lisa Warren, middle-aged with tired eyes. Mrs. Patterson, your husband is here with his attorney. They want to talk about options. Options. Your husband doesn't necessarily want to pursue criminal charges, but he's concerned about your mental state. They brought me to an interview room. Blake sat there with Samuel Whitman, his expensive attorney, both looking grave and concerned. Colette, we want to help you, Samuel said. He had a kind voice, grandfatherly, which made everything worse somehow. What you did tonight was serious. Breaking and entering, attempted theft of trade secrets. These are felony charges. I was trying to prove he's committing fraud. That's exactly the kind of paranoid thinking we're concerned about, Samuel continued smoothly. Your husband has been documenting your deteriorating mental state for weeks. The accusations, the invasions of privacy, the erratic behavior. Blake looked at me with practiced sympathy. I don't want to see you go to jail, Colette. You need help, not punishment. What's the alternative, I asked, though I already knew this was another trap. Samuel slid papers across the table. Voluntary psychiatric evaluation. You check yourself into Cascadia Behavioral Health for a 72-hour hold. Get evaluated by professionals. If you cooperate, your husband will drop all charges. And if I don't, then we proceed with criminal charges. Breaking and entering attempted theft of corporate secrets. You'll likely spend tonight and several more nights in jail awaiting arraignment. You'll have a criminal record. Your husband will testify about your unstable behavior. It won't end well for you. Detective Warren leaned forward. Mrs. Patterson, I've been doing this job for 19 years. I can tell you're going through something difficult. Maybe taking your husband's offer is the smart choice here. Get some help. Sort yourself out. This doesn't have to ruin your life. I looked around the room. At Blake pretending to care. At his powerful attorney spinning everything. At the detective who meant well but believed Blake's lies. At the papers in front of me, offering a way out that was really just another cage. At 4 a.m, exhausted and broken, I signed the papers. They transferred me directly from the police station to Cascadia Behavioral Health, a private psychiatric facility in a suburb north of Seattle. I'd never been inside a psychiatric hospital before. My mother had been in one twice before her suicide, and the stories she'd told me had been nightmares. This place was nicer. Clean, modern, decorated to look calming, but it was still a locked facility. They took my clothes, gave me hospital scrubs, took my phone, my wallet, everything. Put me in a small room with a bed, a chair, and a window that didn't open. Friday morning, I met Dr. Helen Morrison, the psychiatrist assigned to evaluate me. She was maybe 50, professional, and kind in that clinical way doctors have. "Colette, I'm going to ask you some questions. I want you to be honest with me." Blake had already provided her with background. My mother's suicide 14 months ago, my recent paranoid delusions about his business, my arrest for breaking into his office. It was all there in the file she held. "My husband is having an affair and committing investment fraud," I told her calmly. "I found evidence of both. He's been gaslighting me, making everyone think I'm mentally unstable so no one will believe me when I expose him." I could hear how it sounded. I could see it on Dr. Morrison's face. Classic paranoid delusions, conspiracy thinking, blaming spouse, unable to accept reality. "Your mother struggled with mental illness," Dr. Morrison said gently. "Depression, paranoid ideation toward the end. It's possible you've inherited some vulnerability to similar issues, especially given the stress of her death." "I'm not mentally ill. Blake is manipulating everyone." "That's what you believe," she acknowledged. "But your belief, even if you're absolutely convinced it's true, doesn't necessarily reflect reality. That's the nature of certain mental health conditions. The delusions feel completely real to the person experiencing them." She prescribed anti-anxiety medication. When I refused to take it, a nurse named Linda explained that refusing medication could extend my hold beyond 72 hours. If I didn't cooperate with treatment, they could keep me longer. I took the medication. It made me feel foggy, disconnected. Saturday afternoon, Blake visited, brought flowers. Other patients and staff saw a devoted husband visiting his sick wife. He played the role beautifully. When we were alone in the visitor's room, he leaned close and whispered, "You're exactly where you belong. No one will ever believe you now." He told me he'd taken over everything at home, had power of attorney while I was incapacitated. He was filing for legal separation, citing mental incapacity. When I got out, I'd have nothing. No home, no money. No credibility, no future. "The Montgomery Project closes next week," he whispered. $75 million. I win, Colette. You lose. I spent Saturday night lying in that narrow hospital bed staring at the ceiling. Blake had outmaneuvered me at every turn, isolated me socially, trapped me financially, created a legal and medical record of my instability. I had a psychiatric record now. Anything I said would be dismissed as delusion. Sunday, I stopped fighting, became a model patient, told Dr. Morrison I'd been stressed, not thinking clearly, acted grateful for Blake's support, played the role they expected, because I needed to get out. I couldn't fight Blake from inside a psychiatric facility. Monday morning, they released me after the 72-hour evaluation. Dr. Morrison noted I'd shown significant improvement. Blake picked me up all smiles for the staff. During the drive home, I said nothing, just stared out the window thinking. Blake kept talking about how we'd work through this, how I needed to keep seeing Dr. Harrison, how things could get better if I cooperated. I wasn't listening. I was planning. I couldn't fight Blake directly. He was too powerful, too prepared, too many steps ahead. But maybe I didn't have to fight him directly. Maybe I could find someone else with power to help. Someone Blake couldn't manipulate or control. I didn't yet know that this final, desperate solution would trigger Blake's most vicious retaliation and nearly destroy me completely. But it would also ultimately be what saved me. The week after my release from Cascadia felt surreal. I was home but essentially under house arrest. Blake monitored everything. Where I went, who I talked to, what I did. I had to attend court-mandated therapy twice a week with Dr. Harrison, who spent our sessions trying to help me accept that Blake's affair was partially my fault for letting myself go. Wednesday afternoon, Blake was at his office for a meeting that would last hours. I had maybe 3 hours of unsupervised time. I remembered Harold, Blake's uncle, 68 years old, who'd always treated me like the daughter he never had. Harold had invested his retirement savings in the Montgomery Project. $380,000, everything he'd saved over 40 years of work. If anyone would believe me about Blake's fraud, it would be Harold. He had business experience, understood finances. And if Blake was stealing from him, Harold would want to know. I called him from the landline, not my cell phone. Blake was definitely tracking my cell. "Harold, it's Colette. Can we meet? It's urgent." We met at a coffee shop in Kirkland, far enough from Bellevue that we wouldn't run into anyone we knew. Harold looked older than I remembered. Blake's fraud was already taking its toll, even if Harold didn't know it yet. "What's going on, sweetheart?" Harold asked. "Blake mentioned you've been going through a rough time." Of course, Blake had gotten to him too. "Harold, I need you to listen with an open mind. Blake has been lying to you, to everyone. He's committing investment fraud with the Montgomery Project." Harold's expression shifted. Not dismissive like everyone else, but concerned. Interested. "Go on," he said. I explained everything. The 2 sets of books, the inflated projections, the impossible returns Blake had promised. I described what I'd seen in his files, the offshore accounts, the scheme. Harold listened carefully. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "The returns have been slower than Blake promised," Harold finally said. "He keeps giving excuses about permits, construction delays. I've been wondering if something was off." "You believe me?" "I believe you're telling me what you saw. And I know enough about commercial real estate to recognize what you're describing. If those numbers are accurate, Blake has been lying to his investors." For the first time in weeks, I felt hope. "I have a contact at the SEC," Harold continued. "Douglas Grant, a former business partner. If I bring him this information, if it's as bad as you say, he'll have to investigate. I can get more evidence, current financial statements. But I need your help." "What do you need?" "Access to Blake's files again. But I need to be smarter this time. If I can photograph current statements, prove the fraud is ongoing, Douglas will have enough to start an official investigation." Harold nodded slowly. "Blake is hosting a dinner meeting Thursday night at your house, isn't he? For investors in the Montgomery Project. I got an invitation." "He is. I'm supposed to play hostess." "Then that's when you get the evidence. While Blake is distracted with his investors, you access his files. Send them to my encrypted email." We worked out the details. It was risky, but it might work. Harold gave me his encrypted email address, made me memorize it instead of writing it down. When we parted ways, Harold hugged me. "Blake always underestimated you," he said. "That's going to be his downfall." Thursday evening, Blake hosted his dinner meeting at our house. 3 investors arrived at 7, including Richard Montgomery, Ashley's father. Blake had told Richard that Ashley and I got along great, another lie in his web of deception. I played the perfect hostess. Set out appetizers, poured wine, smiled, and made small talk. Blake introduced me as his wife, who was recovering from some health issues. The investors looked at me with polite sympathy. Around 8, while Blake and the investors were deep in discussion about construction timelines in the dining room, I excused myself to the kitchen. My heart pounded as I grabbed Blake's briefcase from his study. He'd brought home his iPad, the one with all his current financial files. In the kitchen, hands shaking, I opened the iPad. Found the files, current financial statements for the Montgomery Project. They showed the same fraud I'd seen before, but updated. The construction costs were even higher than he'd told investors. The profit margins were impossible. He was going to default on his promises, and dozens of families would lose their savings. I photographed every document, working as quickly as I could. Then I accessed Harold's encrypted email through a browser and sent everything. Cleared the browser history. Put the iPad back in Blake's briefcase exactly as I'd found it. Returned to the dining room with more wine, smiling, acting normal. My heart was racing, but I'd done it. Friday, Harold called from a blocked number while Blake was at work. Douglas reviewed the documents. Colette, this is even worse than we thought. Clear evidence of securities fraud, wire fraud, investor misrepresentation. Multiple counts. Douglas is starting an official SEC investigation. How long until Blake is charged? 3 to 4 months, probably. These things take time. But Douglas says Blake will be ruined. He's looking at federal charges, possibly prison time. What do I do until then? Stay quiet. Don't let Blake suspect anything. Douglas will handle it from here. In a few months, this will all be over. I felt lighter than I had in weeks. Finally, someone believed me. Finally, justice was coming. Blake would be exposed, prosecuted, destroyed. I'd file for divorce while he was under criminal investigation. Everything would be annulled due to fraud. I'd get my life back. Saturday, I met Harold again. He explained the timeline, how the investigation would proceed. He promised to keep me updated. Promised that Blake's reign of terror was ending. For the first time since that awful party, I felt like I could breathe. Sunday night shattered everything. I came home around 8 after meeting Harold at a park to discuss the investigation. Blake was waiting in the living room with Samuel Whitman and 2 other men I didn't recognize. Blake was smiling. Not the fake, sympathetic smile he'd been wearing for weeks. A real smile. Predatory. "Did you really think I wouldn't find out about Harold?" he said. My blood turned to ice. "I've been tracking your phone this entire time, Colette. Every call, every meeting. I know about all of it." One of the men with Blake opened a laptop, turned it to face me. Security camera footage. Me and Harold at the coffee shop. At the park. Every meeting we'd had. "Your Uncle Harold was helping me," I said to Blake. "He believed me about your fraud." Blake laughed. "Is that what you think?" Samuel Whitman spoke up. "Mrs. Patterson, we need to show you something." They pulled out more documents. Financial records showing that Harold's investment in the Montgomery project wasn't like the other investors. Harold had received special returns. Payments under the table. Harold's $380,000 investment had actually made him nearly $500,000 so far. Harold was in on the fraud. He'd been profiting from it. "Harold wasn't helping you," Blake said. "He was helping me, documenting your continued harassment, recording your meetings. Every promise you made to get evidence was documented. Every accusation you made was recorded." But Douglas Grant, at the SEC, Douglas accepted a $50,000 consulting fee from my company last month, Blake interrupted. For unrelated work, of course. Totally legal. But when Harold approached him with your accusations, Douglas called me immediately. He's not pursuing any investigation. The room tilted. Harold had betrayed me, used me, set me up. "Why?" I whispered. "Because I asked him to," Blake said simply. "Harold owes me. I made him rich. And he doesn't particularly like you anyway. He thinks you're a gold digger who never appreciated what I gave you." Samuel pulled out more papers. "Mrs. Patterson, you violated the terms of your psychiatric release. You continued making false accusations. You accessed your husband's confidential documents again. We have proof of all of it." "Blake is filing for a restraining order," Samuel continued. "And given your escalating behavior, we're petitioning for involuntary commitment. Long-term this time. There's a court hearing Monday morning." "You can't do this." "Actually, I can." Blake leaned forward. "You broke into my office. You were institutionalized for psychiatric evaluation. You violated the terms of your release by continuing to harass me and my business associates. You accessed my confidential files again. Any judge will agree you're a danger to yourself and others." That's when Ashley appeared from the other room. I hadn't even known she was there. She looked at me with something almost like pity. "Colette, I know this is hard," Ashley said, "but Blake and I are getting married." She showed me her engagement ring. Enormous, expensive, probably cost more than my car. "I'm pregnant," Ashley continued. 3 months. The baby is due in April. Blake is moving on. You need to accept that and get help." I stared at her, this 26-year-old woman wearing my future on her finger, carrying my husband's child. Blake stood up. "The hearing is Monday at 9. Until then, you're confined to the guest room. For your own safety." They actually locked me in. Blake had installed a lock on the guest room door, and he locked it from the outside. I heard them all downstairs. Blake and Ashley laughing, Samuel making phone calls. The sound of wine glasses clinking. I sat on the floor of that guest room completely broken. I'd lost everything. Money, friends, credibility, freedom. The one person I thought was helping me had been betraying me all along. The SEC contact was compromised. Blake was about to have me committed long-term. His pregnant mistress was living in my house wearing his ring. I had no evidence, no allies, no resources, no hope. Around 5 in the morning, unable to sleep, I was searching through the guest room for anything I could use. Found an old phone charger in the drawer, then remembered something. An old iPad of mine from years ago that I'd kept on the closet shelf. Blake had taken my current devices, but didn't know about this ancient iPad I hadn't used in 3 years. I found it buried under old linens. The battery was dead. I plugged it in, waited. It powered on, still connected to Wi-Fi. Blake didn't know this device existed. I had 3 hours until the court hearing. 3 hours to try one last desperate thing. I started searching frantically for investigative journalists in Seattle, someone who specialized in financial crime, someone who might believe me. I found Rachel Torres, a reporter for the Seattle Times. Her articles on corporate fraud were thorough, well-researched, damning. If anyone would investigate Blake, it was her. I sent her an email at 5:30 in the morning, explaining everything, attaching the photos I still had saved on this old iPad from the first time I'd found evidence. Begged her to look into Blake Patterson and the Montgomery Project. At 6, Blake unlocked the door. "Time to get ready for court," he said cheerfully. I had no response from Rachel. No help coming. No way out. This was the end. The court hearing started at 9. Blake's attorney Samuel had prepared everything perfectly. I sat in a courtroom wearing the same clothes I'd worn yesterday, feeling like I was watching my own life end. Judge Elizabeth Hammond reviewed the case. Middle-aged, stern, thorough. She read through the documents Samuel presented. My psychiatric hospitalization. My arrest for breaking and entering. The restraining order evidence. Harold's testimony about my harassment. Blake's testimony about my deteriorating mental state. "Your Honor, my client loves his wife," Samuel said, "but she's become dangerous. To herself and to others. She needs professional help, long-term care." I tried to defend myself, tried to explain about Blake's fraud, his manipulation, his lies, but I could hear how I sounded. Desperate, paranoid, making wild accusations. Judge Hammond looked at me with something like pity. "Mrs. Patterson, I'm ordering a 30-day psychiatric evaluation. You'll be transferred to a state facility immediately for comprehensive assessment." "Please," I begged. "Blake is lying about everything. I have proof." "Mrs. Patterson, that's enough. Bailiff, please escort her." Blake testified tearfully about how much he loved me, how worried he was, how he just wanted me to get better. Ashley sat in the back of the courtroom, one hand on her, barely showing belly, watching. The bailiff put handcuffs on me, led me out of the courtroom while I kept insisting Blake was committing fraud, that I wasn't crazy, that someone needed to investigate. My protests only confirmed in everyone's mind that I was exactly as unstable as Blake claimed. They transferred me in a transport van to the state psychiatric hospital about 40 minutes north of Seattle. This facility was nothing like Cascadia. Older, grimmer, overwhelmed. The place my mother had been before she died. During processing, a nurse named Linda was checking my belongings. She found the old iPad in my bag, the one Blake still didn't know about. It buzzed with a notification. Linda looked at the screen, then at me. "You have an email from Rachel Torres at the Seattle Times." "Can I see it?" "Please." Linda hesitated. It was against protocol. But something in my face must have moved her. "You have 2 minutes," she said quietly, glancing around to make sure no one was watching. The email from Rachel said, "Got your message. These documents are explosive. This is a major story. Call me now. Here's my number." "I need to make a phone call," I told Linda desperately. "Please, one phone call. It's the only way to prove I'm telling the truth." Linda had been a psychiatric nurse for 22 years. She'd seen real mental illness. She'd also seen abuse victims, women trapped by powerful men, women the system failed. Something in my story, or maybe just something in my eyes, made her take a risk. 5 minutes, Linda said. "That's all I can give you. There's a phone in the hall." I called Rachel Torres with shaking hands. "Rachel Torres," she answered on the second ring. "This is Colette Patterson. You emailed me about Blake Patterson and the Montgomery Project." "Colette, I've been trying to reach you. These documents you sent me, I've spent the last 3 hours verifying them. This is one of the biggest financial fraud cases I've seen in years. Are you safe? Where are you?" "I'm in a state psychiatric hospital. Blake had me committed. He's been gaslighting everyone, making them think I'm crazy so no one will believe me. Can you hold on for 2 weeks? I need time to build the full story. Contact. Other investors get multiple sources. But once I publish this, they'll have to release you. Blake won't be able to keep you locked up once his fraud is exposed." 2 weeks. I know it's a lot to ask, but I need to do this right. Make it bulletproof. Can you hang on? I thought about my mother, how she'd spent her last weeks in a facility like this, how she'd given up hope, how she'd ended her own life rather than keep fighting. "Yes," I said, "I can hang on. I promise you, Colette, this story is going to destroy him. Just hold on." The next week was the hardest of my life. I played along with the facility's routine, attended therapy groups, took medication, acted compliant. My psychiatrist doctor, James Brennan, noted my cooperative behavior, my improved attitude. Blake visited twice that week, gloating. Wednesday afternoon, he sat across from me in the visitor's room, smiling. "Ashley and I are moving into a penthouse overlooking Elliott Bay. The Montgomery Project closes next week. $75 million. I'm untouchable, Colette. You'll be here for months, maybe years. No one even remembers you exist." Friday afternoon of that first week, Blake hosted a closing party for the Montgomery Project. I knew about it from his bragging. Investors celebrating champagne flowing, everyone treating Blake like a hero. 15 luxury condos selling for $5 million each. His empire at its peak. Meanwhile, Rachel Torres was working around the clock. She contacted 23 investors across Blake's various development projects. Found patterns of fraud stretching back 5 years, multiple projects, dozens of victims. Found a whistleblower named Thomas Wright, former accountant at Blake's company. Thomas provided insider testimony and more documents, everything Rachel needed. Rachel verified every detail through multiple sources. Made the story bulletproof. Friday morning of my second week, day 11 of my commitment, the Seattle Times published Rachel's exposé. The headline ran on the front page, "Local real estate developer accused of $200 million fraud scheme." The article detailed everything: Blake's systematic defrauding of investors across 17 different projects, the 2 sets of books, the offshore accounts, the 47 victims identified so far, featured testimony from Thomas Wright, included my story about being silenced and institutionalized to prevent me from exposing the fraud. By noon, the story had gone viral. National news outlets picked it up. The SEC announced an emergency investigation. The FBI joined, citing federal wire fraud. Blake's assets were frozen, pending investigation. Investors filed an emergency injunction stopping the Montgomery project closing. Blake's world imploded in a single day. Friday afternoon around 4, Blake showed up at the psychiatric facility. Security let him in initially because he was legally still my husband. He got to my room wild-eyed and terrifying. "You destroyed everything," he grabbed me, hands around my throat. "Everything I built. You're gonna call that reporter right now and recant. Say you made it all up." I couldn't breathe. My vision started darkening. His hands squeezed tighter. The door burst open. Linda and 2 security guards pulled Blake off me. I collapsed, gasping, throat burning. "Call the police," Linda shouted. "Now." Blake fought them, screaming about how I'd ruined him, how I'd pay for this. They restrained him until Seattle police arrived, arrested him for assault. I was taken to the medical wing, treated for bruises on my throat. My neck ached, but I was alive. Saturday morning, Judge Hammond held an emergency hearing to review my case. Rachel Torres's article had changed everything. The judge reviewed the new evidence, the national news coverage, the criminal investigation into Blake. Dr. Brennan testified that I showed no signs of actual mental illness, that my previous hospitalization had been based on false information, that everything I'd claimed about Blake's fraud appeared to be true. Judge Hammond apologized to me, actually apologized, ordered my immediate release, issued an emergency restraining order against Blake. Saturday afternoon, I walked out of the state psychiatric facility, free, bruised but victorious. Blake was in jail charged with assault and under federal investigation for fraud. His assets were frozen, his reputation destroyed. The Seattle Times story had exposed everything. But as I stood outside that facility, breathing fresh air for the first time in 2 weeks, I realized this wasn't over. Blake still had powerful attorneys. He might find a way out. His assets were frozen, but the legal process would take months. Ashley was still pregnant with his child. The Montgomery project might still close if his lawyers worked fast enough. I'd won the battle, but I needed to finish the war. I needed to completely destroy his empire so he could never hurt anyone again. The real fight was just beginning. 2 weeks after my release, I was staying at a women's shelter in Seattle, rebuilding my life piece by piece. The Seattle Times story had sparked national coverage. CNN ran segments about financial fraud and domestic abuse. MSNBC covered the story of how I'd been gaslighted and institutionalized. Financial news outlets dissected Blake's schemes. Rachel Torres wrote follow-up articles, each one uncovering more victims, more fraud. She interviewed me for a major piece about women silenced by powerful men. Something unexpected happened. Strangers started reaching out. Women who'd experienced similar situations. People who believed me, supported me. Someone created a GoFundMe to help me get back on my feet. Within a week, it had raised $85,000 from people across the country who'd heard my story. Law firms offered pro bono representation. Sandra Campbell, a specialist in financial fraud and divorce cases, took my case. She was brilliant, ruthless, exactly what I needed. "We're going to take everything from him," Sandra promised during our first meeting. "Every asset, every penny. He's going to pay for what he did to you and to those investors." The FBI investigation moved quickly once they had Thomas Wright's insider testimony and Rachel's documented evidence. Federal agents executed search warrants on Blake's office, his home, his bank accounts. They found offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, shell companies in Delaware, a web of fraud stretching back 7 years. Blake had defrauded investors of approximately $214 million across 17 development projects. They identified 47 victims. Families who'd trusted him with their retirement savings, their children's college funds, their futures. The Montgomery Project investigation revealed something even worse. An emergency audit showed the luxury condos were built with substandard materials. Blake had cut costs everywhere possible to pocket more investor money. The building wasn't up to code, wasn't safe. The city of Seattle issued an emergency order. The building had to be demolished. All 15 condo buyers got refunds. Every investor lost everything. Blake's reputation was completely destroyed. 3 weeks after the scandal broke, Ashley Montgomery held a press conference with her attorney. She was 4 months pregnant, showing now, and looked devastated. "I was manipulated by Blake Patterson," she said, reading from a prepared statement. "He promised me partnership, love, a future together. I didn't know the full extent of his fraud. My own father lost $6 million in the Montgomery Project. I've been a victim too." She publicly apologized to me, apologized to all the investors, agreed to testify against Blake in exchange for immunity. I watched the press conference from Sandra's office. Part of me felt satisfaction at Ashley's downfall, but mostly I felt sad for her. She was 26 pregnant, and realizing the man she'd loved was a monster. Harold's involvement came out too. The SEC charged him as an accomplice. He eventually took a plea deal, agreed to testify against Blake in exchange for a reduced sentence. He had to pay back all his ill-gotten gains in restitution, lost his retirement savings anyway. The betrayal from Blake's own uncle cut deep. But watching Harold face consequences brought a measure of justice. Sandra filed for divorce on my behalf 6 weeks after the scandal broke. We sought full restitution for economic abuse, emotional damages, and years of financial control. Blake's legitimate assets before they were frozen totaled about $18 million. Properties, investments, accounts that weren't tied to the fraud. As his wife, I was entitled to half, plus damages. 6 months after that awful party where Blake humiliated me, his criminal trial began. It became one of Seattle's biggest stories. The courthouse was packed every day with reporters, victims, spectators. I testified for 3 days, told the jury everything: the public humiliation, the systematic isolation, the gaslighting, the financial control, the psychiatric abuse, the violence. Thomas Wright testified about how Blake had created fake financial projections, misled investors, and moved money to offshore accounts. Forensic accountants presented evidence of fraud spanning 7 years. Investor after investor testified about how Blake had stolen their life savings. The trial lasted 6 weeks. The jury deliberated for 2 days. Guilty on 43 counts of securities fraud, wire fraud, and investor manipulation, guilty of assault. The jury also convicted him on racketeering charges the prosecutors had added. At sentencing, Judge Hammond was stern. "Mr. Patterson, you systematically defrauded dozens of families. You manipulated your own wife, had her institutionalized when she tried to expose your crimes, and then physically attacked her. You've shown no remorse. This court sentences you to 24 years in federal prison, followed by supervised release. You are ordered to pay full restitution to all victims." 24 years. Blake would be 60 when he got out if he survived prison. His empire, his reputation, his freedom, all gone. From Blake's liquidated assets, I received $4.2 million. My share of legitimate assets plus damages for the years of abuse. It wasn't about the money, though. It was about justice. Validation. Proof that I'd been telling the truth all along. 9 months after walking out of that psychiatric facility, I used part of my settlement to start a foundation. I called it Believed Foundation because that's what I'd needed most when no one believed me. The foundation helps women escape financially abusive relationships. We provide legal aid, temporary housing, therapy, job training. Everything I wished I'd had when Blake trapped me. Rachel Torres wrote a cover story for a national magazine about the foundation's launch. We opened our first office in downtown Seattle, with plans to expand nationally. I reconnected with my sister Madison. Our relationship had been damaged by Blake's manipulation by her initial refusal to believe me. It took time, but we rebuilt it slowly. She apologized, cried, told me she'd spend the rest of her life making it up to me. I forgave her. Blake had fooled everyone, even the people who loved me most. I started therapy with a trauma specialist to process everything I'd been through, joined a support group for survivors of domestic abuse, met other women who'd experienced similar gaslighting, similar traps. Hearing their stories helped me understand that what happened to me wasn't unique. Financial abuse and coercive control happen more often than people realize. Linda, the nurse who'd let me make that crucial phone call to Rachel, became a friend. She'd been fired from the state facility for breaking protocol, but she said it was worth it. I hired her as the head nurse for Believed Foundation's crisis center. Sometimes, one act of courage changes everything. Linda's courage saved my life. 1 year after the party that destroyed my marriage and exposed Blake's crimes, I stood at a podium at a women's empowerment conference. 500 women filled the hotel ballroom listening. I was 35 years old now, stronger than I ever imagined possible. I'd survived Blake's worst and come out the other side. "I'm going to tell you something important," I said to the audience. "When someone tries to convince you that you're crazy, that your reality isn't real, that your perceptions are wrong, that's called gaslighting. It's emotional abuse. And it's designed to make you doubt yourself so completely that you stop fighting back." I told them my story. The humiliation, the isolation, the financial trap, the psychiatric abuse. I told them about hitting rock bottom in that state facility, about making one desperate phone call, about how Rachel Torres believed me when no one else would. The most important thing I learned is this: trust yourself, document everything. Screenshots, photos, records. Keep evidence somewhere safe that your abuser can't access. And find one person who believes you. Just one. That's all it takes to start fighting back. The speech got a standing ovation. Afterward, dozens of women came up to me sharing their own stories, thanking me for speaking out. 15 months after his conviction, I visited Blake in federal prison. It was voluntary part of my closure process. My therapist suggested it might help me finally let go of the anger I still carried. Blake was escorted into the visitor's room wearing an orange prison jumpsuit. He looked diminished somehow. Older, smaller, broken. Prison hadn't been kind to him. He sat down across from me, stared at the table. "Colette," he said quietly, "I'm sorry. For all of it. I know that doesn't mean anything now, but I need to say it. I destroyed your life and so many others. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know I regret everything." I looked at him calmly. Felt nothing. No anger, no pain, no satisfaction. Just empty where he used to be. "You told me I didn't meet your standards," I said. "That you'd rather kiss your dog than me. Do you remember that night?" "I remember. I was cruel. I was trying to hurt you." "I learned something important that night, Blake. My standards were always higher than yours. You wanted money, power, status. I wanted honesty, respect, love. Real love. Not the fake version you performed when it suited you. I know that now. I'm not here to forgive you," I continued. "I'm here to tell you that you freed me. Every woman you defrauded has been made whole through restitution. Everyone you lied to knows the truth now. Your luxury empire is gone. And me, I built something real. Something that helps people instead of destroying them." Blake started crying, actual tears running down his face. He looked pathetic. I stood up. "Goodbye, Blake. I hope you spend the next 24 years thinking about what you did. I hope it keeps you up at night." Because every night you're in here, I'll be out there living the life I deserve. I walked out of that prison and didn't look back. The real meaning of everything I'd been through became clear over the following months. Blake had tried to erase me, erase my sanity, my credibility, my very existence. He'd used systems meant to protect people, healthcare, and legal systems as weapons against me. He'd manipulated everyone around me into doubting my reality. But the truth is persistent. It waits. It endures. Even when buried under lies, even when no one believes it, truth eventually surfaces. You just have to hold on long enough for someone to listen. I learned to document everything, to trust my instincts even when everyone said I was wrong. I learned that my worth isn't defined by someone who treats me as worthless. I learned that sometimes the worst thing someone can do is make you doubt your own reality. Most importantly, I learned that I'm stronger than I ever knew. Strong enough to survive Blake's systematic destruction. Strong enough to fight back when I had nothing left. Strong enough to rebuild from absolute zero. Present day, 2 years after that party, I attended a fundraising gala for Believed Foundation. We'd helped over 300 women escape financial abuse, opened offices in 5 cities. I'd testified before Congress about financial coercive control, helping pass legislation in Washington state to protect victims. I wore a green dress to the gala, the same color as the one I'd worn that awful night. But this time I wasn't trying to impress anyone or win back someone's affection. I was standing in my own power. A man approached during the reception, asked me to dance. He was kind attractive, worked in technology, nothing like Blake. I'd love to, I said, smiling. As we danced, I thought about how far I'd come. From that humiliating moment on the dance floor to this moment of triumph. Blake said he'd rather kiss his dog than me. I'd destroyed his luxury empire, but more importantly, I'd discovered my own strength. I didn't need Blake's approval, his money, or his love. I'd never needed it. I only needed myself. Sometimes the worst night of your life becomes the doorway to your best life. You just have to be brave enough to walk through. Blake remains in federal prison with an earliest release date in 21 years. He'll be 60, his youth and power gone. Ashley had their baby, a daughter, and moved back home with her parents. She sends me a card every year on the anniversary of Blake's conviction, thanking me for exposing him before he could hurt more people. Believed Foundation continues to grow. We've helped women across the country escape situations similar to mine. Every time I see someone walk through our doors broken and leave months later rebuilt, I know that everything I survived had meaning. The worst thing someone can do is try to make you doubt your reality. But here's what they don't understand. The truth doesn't need anyone's belief to exist. It exists whether people believe it or not. Your job is simply to keep speaking it, keep documenting it, keep fighting for it. Eventually, someone will listen. Eventually, justice will come. And when it does, the victory is sweeter than anything you can imagine. I want to ask you something. Have you ever been in a situation where someone made you doubt your own reality? Have you witnessed financial abuse or gaslighting in your community? How do you think we as a society can better support people escaping abusive relationships? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your story might help someone else realize they're not alone. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button, subscribe to stay updated on stories like this, and share this with someone who might need to hear it. You never know whose life you might change by simply sharing the truth. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for believing survivors. Thank you for being part of a community that refuses to let powerful people silence the truth. Stay strong, stay brave, and never stop believing in yourself even when the whole world tells you you're wrong. Sometimes you're the only one who knows the truth, and that has to be enough until others catch up. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other.